Um, well, we've had probably some of the best experts in plants and birds. We have also got one of the best experts in fish to be the next speaker. Dr. Grant Gilmore, was very instrumental in helping us save the Oslo boat ramp. They were going to, let's have a hand for that. They were going to originally put in a 5-acre parking lot in the mangroves area and then dredge out to the intercoastal waterway, and we thought that was kind of a bad idea. And it is one of the best places for birds breeding around, and so we tried to keep it save it. He is president and chief scientist of the Estuarine Coastal and Ocean Science. Dr. Gilmore has been doing marine research and technology development with emphasis on fish ecology and public education. And he was previously at the Tropical Ecoscience NASA Dynamic Corp in the Kennedy Space Center, and was at Harbor Branch Institute in Fort Pierce. And he's participated in 7 international deep-sea expeditions using submarines in the tropical Western Atlantic from West Indies, Bahamas, Cuba, Central America, and the Galapagos. Galapagos is one of my favorite spots. If you want to know all about the beginning of some of these birds and things. He has presented some of this work at 25 national, international television documentary programs, National Geographic, Society, Discovery, Audubon, Animal Planet, New Zealand, TV, Fox, and then on NPR radio and Living on Earth's programs. We're going to be learning what's happening in Florida. His talk is, and this is really an important issue, your lawn versus seagrass, what we must do to save our fishes, manatees, and other organisms. Dr. Grant Gilmore.
Thank you, Richard. Following that bird talk we just heard was very difficult. Now I'm going to tell you some mythology. The underwater world is basically mythical. You might learn more from the movie Avatar. And it's very difficult to get a group to pay attention to fish like you do birds. I've tried. For about 50 years now I've tried. And the latest effort was the largest fish conservation group in the United States, the Coastal Conservation Association. And I'd say and this is coming from their words, their leadership told me about 90% of them don't really care where the fish come from, or water quality or habitat. They just want to catch it on a weekend, along with a can of beer, okay? So that's what the marine biologist, has to put up with, unfortunately. So Audubon has helped me save fish, which has been great. And of course, they look at it as bird food too, It's all associated. So I'd like to address 2 types of grass, one that everybody's familiar with, you pass a lot of it, it's outside the door here, and seagrass. How many of you put your heads underwater and swam through a seagrass bed before? Oh my gosh, great. I'm going to ask that about the next anglers group I address. More bird people going underwater and plant people. Seagrass can disappear and we never notice, and I'm going to present a little bit of that. What I do as a marine scientist is out of sight of most people, and therefore out of mind. It's just not there. So I'm going to try to bring that into your minds today in this talk. And also I'd like to present some basic biological principles. There's your lawn. Oh, let's go back. so that you know that that manatee grass on the right there is not linguine. That's manatee grass. Manatees love that, and that's what should be planted out here in the lagoon is manatee grass if we know what's killing it. And of course, there's your lawn grass as well. Where do lawns and our perception of lawns come from? It's a good question. Everybody wants that little patch of green. Post-World War II, it took off. The whole industry took off, and it's a burgeoning business here in Florida. Well, a few hundred years ago, it was popular in Europe, and we think we got it from Europe. But then maybe 1,000 years ago, there were fields around castles. Probably not like that field, but there were fields around castles. You see your enemy coming. And possibly even beyond that. Aboriginal peoples hunting in the Great Plains or in the African Serengeti would probably want to see where their predators and prey were. So there's a human perception, and I look at a lot of things this way, sharks included. You know, how many of you are going to be attacked by a shark? But how many of you might die on the road down here? Nobody cares about putting their cell phone in front of their face when they're driving down the road, but they won't put their big toe in the beach out here because the shark might eat it. And anyway, it's all up here, okay? And I think the lawn has something to do with that as well. And so when we moved to Florida, and this is a local scene, you make sure you get the grass and that token palm tree that was just mentioned in the talk before last. And now you're in Florida. And now you're going to have to worry about a lot of other things because you're in Florida. Well, I wanted to present some basic biological laws, ones that require all life to survive here on Earth, and also is behind the theory of evolution. Natural variation, all of us are different. If we're all the same and we all got COVID, we'd probably all be dead, right? So why do you clone all your orange trees out here and wonder why when none dies, the whole grove dies? Need natural variation, and that actually produces your biodiversity. No one is the same. Everybody's going to have a different survival benefit. And you inherit traits from your parents that you give on to your offspring that are hopefully going to ensure survival in the future. And so you look at the future relationships and all the relationships of living organisms, and they form communities. And then you have environmental variation. None of us can sit in the same place, experience the same thing at the same time because we're in different positions. Therefore, we have different environmental influence on us, another law in biology. And this also includes all your physical factors such as temperature, air, soil, water, etc. And that forms ecosystems. So I'm going to talk about ecosystems, and your yard is an ecosystem. And then we'll see the similarities in all these ecosystems as we go underwater. First, we're supposed to talk about grass here, which grows rapidly, has a rapid turnover relative to trees. And trees are slower, will have a low turnover, and they have a leaf drop. And the remarks earlier about soil buildup, that's critical with both these systems. However, grasses can burn, they can die off annually, and actually because of their high turnover, can produce soil layers quicker than the leaf litter here does. Now, I have a lot of oak trees in my yard, and I use that leaf litter. There's no question that soil builds up quickly with that as well. But grasses have a very high net primary productivity. That net is what we eat. And our net is what we end up mowing in our lawns. And of course, we all eat bread and a wide variety of products that come from grass. So we're dependent on grass. And we aren't the only ones dependent on grass. There are ecosystems that are very productive in producing large amounts of biomass worldwide that are dependent on grass. And then we have structural grass, bambusa grass, And again, that's a very quick and productive way to get wood, actually, if you use bamboo. And this is after 3 days in July in Florida. Now, it's going to grow that way. Why do you want to fertilize it? Why do you want to put anything on it? I grew up in Florida, 70-some years. I never ever fertilized my lawn. I never ever put pesticides or herbicides on it. And I always had a green lawn. I'm hopefully going to tell you why. Here you have some clippings. You wouldn't want a mower like this on my place, but those clippings are easily visible there. Those are going to form thatch down in the grass and actually build up your soil in the grass. And of course, the grass soil is extremely valuable for not only the grass, but for a lot of the other organisms that depend on those ecosystems. Now, Florida, a lot of people move here. They don't realize that Florida is not, well, they know Florida is not like the rest of North America, but Florida literally was left here by Africa years ago. And the basement of Florida, we actually sell it in places. If you drive down 60 past Bardhoe, you see that Florida's dug up and sold as fertilizer. So why would you buy fertilizer? And if these came from my yard, we dug 7-10 feet down, and it was all shells, beautiful shells, to show you that we were underwater at one time. You can do it in your yard here too. You'll find fossils below your yard. That's where Florida was, and Africa just left us over here. So we're geologically different from the remainder of the country. And during the different glacial periods, Florida became twice as large as it is today. And the highlands, I'm sure there was snow. We know there were woolly mammoths running around, mastodons. At least 20 mastodons have been dug up here in Indian River County. They're in every county in the state. It was quite different back then. We had giant ground sloths, and we had people living here 10, 12,000 years ago, along with the saber-toothed tigers. I think this is why we have a fear of sharks, quite frankly. And then the mastodons, and they're dug up locally as well. So Florida, geologically, is a big fossil bed. The ocean has given us some of that, and so have the creatures of the land. And if we look at the pattern of exposure and submergence of the peninsula, and then if we dig down deep enough in the different shell beds, and we have different shell beds and burrow pits around here, some are 450,000 years old. The shells in my driveway are 850,000 years old. We had these, and then of course this is the future too with global warming, that it's a biological basement full of sulfates and phosphorus. And then every bolt of lightning that we were talking about earlier gives us nitrogen. More lightning here than any place else, that gives us nitrogen. So this is from my backyard here in Vero. And my backyard doesn't look like that. But anyway, a lot of people want their lawns to look like that, but that is a monotonous scene with low biodiversity. This is a house being built and the grass being laid down, and the grass that's starting to grow or trying to grow. And it's a typical scene when a house is built in Florida. And this is the grass that is not fertilized and not used, no chemicals have ever been used on this. And as I said, I've never used chemicals on any lawn that I've ever had. And that's it. And it's still green. And allow clover to grow. That fixes nitrogen. Now, if you want to compete with greenness, we could probably do that. But the one thing about that, and we planted a lot of trees, that's the front yard, trees that have grown. And I didn't want to mow that area, obviously. And there's a wide variety of trees there. And we had ponds and cypress trees. This is the backyard. It has to be mowed there. But it produces an ecotone, and we were talking about that earlier, the plant lecture earlier, about the value of having a change in vegetation. You can have foraging out here, and creatures hiding back in here where there's habitat. And at night, there's a big change, of course. You have many creatures that come out to feed at night on the grass. And they're forming a part of that ecosystem. And the ecosystem, again, is the physical parameters along with the biological working together and exchanging nutrients, etc. And then we have the soil food web, which people get all excited about. They don't like moles, but moles are eating a lot of these creatures that actually are eating your grass. So I don't care if the mole produces a little trail here and every once in a while. And of course, you have a wide variety of insects there that the moles are eating. You have chinch bugs, you have mole crickets. This raccoon's digging up something in my backyard there. I don't know what it is. But the interaction between the forest and the yard is really important in getting trees and other vegetation, even if they don't have to be trees. It forms part of that ecosystem, and a food web develops. And the food web is much larger than this, considerably larger than this. It's just an example. Now, seagrass, we don't typically see. So when it disappears, you don't necessarily know it. And I first saw it disappear in 2005, 2006. And it's reached headlines recently when manatees started to suffer and starving. A lot of my knowledge of seagrass came from the work at Harbor Branch. Starting in the early 70s, we had a program called the Indian River Coastal Zone Program, which was an intimate association between the Smithsonian and Harbor Branch. And we had at least 70 postdocs, scientists, and research assistants and students working and focusing on the lagoon and primarily seagrasses. And why seagrasses? Because seagrasses actually harbored the highest biodiversity of organisms in the lagoon. And we're supporting the most creatures either directly or indirectly. And what I ended up doing, these are old maps, that's why it's so blurry. Well, we went from Sebastian down to Stewart, collecting routinely at sites we picked as archival sites. And we used a 200-foot small mesh thing, which nobody in their right mind would use, but we experimented with a variety of these. We averaged 22,000 fish every time we pulled this, eventually 1.8 million fish. Well, that gave us a lot of information. And we invented these drop nets at Harbor Branch, which gave us per unit square area which fish were the most abundant resident fishes and seagrasses, which still people don't believe today what they are, but I'll show you what they are. That army of scientists, by the way, they were all terminated one afternoon in October in 1985 when the Indian River Lagoon Coastal Zone study, because the management of Harbor Branch wanted to go offshore or into pharmaceuticals. So everyone lost their position. I happened to be going offshore, and I happened to have grants supporting my research assistants, so I remained there. But we were using these things up to that point. And this is one seine hall collection in Big Mud Creek down near the power plants. And you see the variety of fish that are in this seagrass bed. You have great barracuda, mullet, even a Goliath grouper, lots of different species. Anchovies would dominate, and anchovies, of course, were eaten by the barracuda, a number of these other predators in here. And we learned a lot about which were the most abundant fish and which ones were the ones that were most dependent on seagrass systems. And we found that the juveniles in particular, this is a gray snapper or mangrove snapper on the tip of the finger there, are dependent on seagrass beds. This is a volunteer group from Florida Oceanographic Society, and we were looking at seagrasses about 10 or 15 years ago. We had trouble finding them down around Stewart. And one thing that research 40, 50 years ago taught us, which has come to light now, literally, is that light is very important. Dissolved oxygen can be important. That the water medium itself is extremely important. And we predicted a long time ago that seagrasses might disappear if something happened to the light levels and the nutrient levels in the lagoon. And knowing that seagrass, like your long grass, responds to nutrient levels, fertilizers, etc. But there are other things up here in the water column that also respond to that. And one thing that I want to stress is that the seagrass bed is quite different from your lawn and these terrestrial grasses in that algae play a major role there. Macroalgae, which people know as seaweeds. And of course now you read in the newspaper algae and people are sort of revolting at algae. And say, well, you shouldn't do that because, well, most of the oxygen, the phytoplankton are the minute algal forms. These are diatoms. And I'm just going to bring some of this. This you can buy at Home Depot. It's called, like to call it D&E. It's diatomaceous earth. Well, if you put this under a microscope, you see these diatoms here. They're made of glass. That's how small they are. I don't know, several 100,000 in here or more. They're producing 30% of the air you're breathing right now. I asked people, I said, well, it's the rainforest. No, 30% is coming from the phytoplankton. And they occur in fresh water, they occur in Lake Okeechobee, Blue Cypress, all the waterways, and the Atlantic Ocean. This is the basis of your food chain in the water column. This is the basis of the food chain in seagrass beds. Most of your creatures in seagrass beds are not eating the seagrass, they're eating algae. In fact, I deliberately put gracilaria in here. If you're fond of seaweed salad at your favorite Japanese restaurant, that's gracilaria. In fact, when I first started at her ranch eons ago, Ernie Estevez, our phycologist from Smithsonian, came down and ate his way across our seagrass bed. And he picked up and he said, oh, it's just like the Philippines, you know. I said, do you want to wash it? No, this is clean. We had clean water back then, by the way. And in talking about light and clean water, I used to snorkel down the Sebastian River making visual fish counts. I did the same thing with the St. Lucie River. I did a drift dive from the North Bridge and Fort Pierce to Harbor Branch with scuba tanks, making fish counts the whole way, and there are grouper and lobsters down underneath those ledges. Now, do that today. In fact, in some places, it's dangerous to actually have contact with the water. And we spent our lives in the water back then. So, diatoms, extremely important. Go to Home Depot and get some D&E. By the way, put this around your house to get rid of insects without using pesticides, okay? Diatomaceous earth. And it gives us our oxygen we breathe. Now, in water, you don't have to be as active as these birds and other organisms in the terrestrial environment. You can sit there and the food comes to you. Ask the oysters. They just sit there. They don't go out hunting for the food. The food drifts to them, these diatoms and copepods and other microscopic organisms. And it's not just true about oysters, but it's also true about the corals and a lot of the other organisms in the water. And so the seagrass beds have food washing over them, in contrast to your yard. Then at night, it's amazing. In fact, we sampled day and night. back then for 15 years. At night, these creatures rise up out of the bottom, and the water column is just filled with organisms. It's totally different. In fact, if you want to collect plankton, you don't go during the day, you go at night. And then the anchovies, which are so numerous near shore during the day, spread out and eat all this plankton. And the most common fish out in the lagoon is the anchovy. I don't care what you like on your pizza, it's common out there. And the bay anchovy is very common. So nighttime, everything just takes off, and you have bioluminescence. You have fish spawning at night. They don't spawn typically during the day. They spawn at night, and and the mates are producing trails of luminescence as they rush through the water and releasing their eggs. In fact, when I was at the Kennedy Space Center, it was so dark up there, you could actually see the eggs glowing after the spawn. You could see this cloud of glowing eggs when the trout spawn. Now, the copepods, they eat the diatoms, and they feed all the fish. The larval fish are extremely important, and that's another point I have to make, is that, and maybe that's on the next slide, let's see. No, but is that all these organisms start as very minute, small individuals, and much smaller than your smallest bird egg. Now, I do recommend this book to get to know the algae of the lagoon, so that you know algae is very important and it's good stuff. And the microcystis blooms, actually I prefer to call it cyanobacteria. They call it blue-green algae all the time, but it's a cyanobacteria. It's in the book too. You'll be able to identify cyanobacteria in this book. But this one, Gracilaria, is a favorite food for us, but also for a lot of organisms in the lagoon, and it dominates, and it forms the drift algae. And we did experiments back in the 70s where the drift algae drifts around the lagoon. You have these like tumbleweeds of Gracilaria, and the fish and the crustaceans hide in there. And that was published back then too, to show the importance of drift algae. And one of the guys that would go around hiding in it was this little goby. Those are fingers, by the way. This is the code goby. That's the most abundant fish and seagrasses of the Indian River Lagoon per unit area. And guess who eats that fish? I went out with commercial fishermen when they were allowed to go commercially for spotted sea trout. Spotted sea trout were regurgitating this goby all over their boats, along with pipefish. So it's kind of like the wolves eating the mice, same sort of thing. This is a very common fish, and seagrasses here that nobody seems to pay much attention to. And this is a shrimp. They're also very common in the drift algae. So are pipefish, by the way. And as I was growing up, I used to eat this and sea lettuce and cookies. It's very edible. And of course, most people look at this fish, the pinfish, as the most common fish in the seagrass, but they're visitors. They're not residents. The goby's a resident. This guy comes in right now by the millions, saturates the seagrass beds, if there are seagrass beds throughout the lagoon, and it eats invertebrates, mostly crustaceans, until it's grazed down all the animals. And again, this was a discovery from that period in the 70s. And there were students in Texas doing the same thing. It becomes very aggressive, territorial, and protects the garden. It's an omnivore. It has teeth like us. And so it's grazing initially on organisms, and then it switches to the algae and raises the garden in the seagrass bed. We had 3 drop nets we dropped simultaneously at the seagrass bed at Jim Island down at Fort Pierce, which is no longer there. And we caught the same exact number of pinfish in each of those 3 simultaneous drops, 50% of the time during the year, showing its territoriality. Now, I got to point out, I said Texas. Georgia, South Carolina don't have seagrass. Neither does Louisiana or Alabama. Texas has seagrass. We have seagrass. The seagrass up in Chesapeake Bay and at Pamlico in North Carolina. Seagrass is a Florida problem and a Texas problem. That's why nobody pays attention to it, I think. And now we don't have seagrass. What are the seagrasses? This was the most abundant seagrass in the lagoon when I came here. It was everywhere. And that's manatee grass, Syringodium filiformis manatee grass. That's the linguine I was showing you at the beginning. Not turtle grass. We couldn't find turtle grass anywhere. I grew up with turtle grass. Pensacola, the dried tortugas for my master's thesis. Turtle grass everywhere. Turtle grass throughout the Caribbean, not the Indian River Lagoon. It's come in since. And then these smaller seagrasses. We discovered this and named them after the founder of Harbor Branch, the regional founder, Johnson, who really wanted to save the planet. And it was an endangered species for a while now. I understand it's been delisted. I don't know the reason for that. I've heard it's because it's found elsewhere. Well, of course, manatees and wood storks aren't found anywhere else either, I guess. But and then this is the grass they're planting now. Shoal grass occurs in the very shallow areas. Sea trout will settle in this one first because it is shallow. But this is not manatee food, okay? So your manatees are still going to starve if you have that growing. The Lasias come in. Manatees do eat the Lasia. That's turtle grass. That's the one I was talking about that's everywhere else was not here, but it's here now. And Rupia widgeon grass. This is amazing grass. It'll grow at hypersalinities. It'll also grow in fresh water. But you don't usually see it out in the lagoon. You see it in the margins or in lakes and ponds. And again, that's the code goby I showed you earlier. There's a pipefish here and blue crab, shrimp that depend on seagrass. In the end, about 1990, we put this together, 248 species of fish in seagrass, 105 in mangroves, and this is deceiving. If you go back into a mangrove canopy, there are only 2 or 3 species of fish back there. The tidal creeks going in and out, that's where you get that species diversity in mangroves. Mangroves are a very harsh environment. We all spent years studying that environment too, and I've written a couple book chapters on it. We really shouldn't be planting mangroves. We should be planting seagrass, except, where you need shoreline protection. And I often ask people, why are mangroves protected? And they say, well, shoreline protection. So no. When I started at Harbor Branch, the first paper published in the scientific literature on the mangroves was published in 1971-72. And I ended up co-authoring with that individual. Mangroves were food. They're food. It's that leaf litter that falls from your oak trees. It's the same thing with mangroves. That detrital material has been eaten by shrimp. And one of our most important fishes in the lagoon, the mullet, striped mullet, it's a detritivore. And Bill Odom, University of Miami, in the 60s, found isotopic signatures for a tree in the mullet. And that gave him the impetus to do his dissertation, which was on the whole ecosystem in mangroves, the Everglades North River system. It was primarily a food source, and that's why they were protected, not for shoreline protection and not for fish habitat. Mangrove forest, dense mangrove forest is probably the worst fish habitat in the lagoon. And we collected another 1.8 million fish in mangroves using 9 different techniques. The least number of fish in any habitat within the Indian River Lagoon was in the dense mangrove forest. Now, the mangroves are spreading north. We didn't have any red mangroves north of Cocoa when I started. Now they're up on approaching St. Augustine, the red mangrove. The old maps here don't show those mangroves. So sea level's rising, mangroves are taking off. We shouldn't waste our time planting mangroves. And of course, everybody blames this guy for eating all the seagrass. Now, let's say that we ran out of food and there are no Publix markets except for one. Would we converge on that one and eat it? And then the fishermen see it and they say, well, it's a manatee. Sea turtles eat seagrass. These are direct grazers. This, by the way, is like the buffalo, the Great Plains. And I got to tell you a manatee story here that I try to tell the fishermen that that research we did back in the 70s showed us that at that ecotone, like between the forest and your yard, there's a seagrass ecotone, and that the trout will feed along that ecotone. And right along that edge of the seagrass, you have most of your organisms in the seagrass bed, most of your shrimp. You go further into a solid seagrass bed, you have fewer organisms, fewer fish. They forage along the edge. That's the ecotone. It's true about weed lines offshore when the fishermen go for dolphin and a wide variety of habitats. So, who produces openings in seagrass beds or ecotones? And the trout fishermen, they'll say, yeah, you go for that hole, you see a trout in that hole in the middle of the seagrass bed because he's feeding at the ecotone. Well, who produces holes in seagrass beds? But these guys. And they said, well, this is West Indian manatee. It just arrived from the West Indies. I said, no, they've been eating them. Aboriginal people's been eating them in Florida for 10,000 years. They've been with seagrasses for millions of years. Don't blame this guy. And you wouldn't believe how many fishermen still blame manatees. In the food chain of the seagrass bed system, algae, phytoplankton, the seagrass itself is eaten by these guys, but it's the algae that's typically eaten by the invertebrates, and the pinfish eats the algae. This guy is feeding on the very small crustaceans, and the trout is feeding on this guy, and guess who eats the trout? Number one predator on spotted sea trout in the lagoon. Eats more trout than recreational commercial fishermen together when there was commercial fishing for them in the lagoon. The bottlenose dolphin. Yeah, somebody said that. Bottlenose dolphin, number one predator, and that was the dissertation for the late Neil Burrows at the University of Miami. And I didn't put the dolphin in there, and it's a big mistake. Now, emphasize again, the trout eggs, about a millimeter in size. That's small. A large trout released 1 million of those eggs on one night spawn. The average is about 250 to 500,000. And then come back 5 to 6 days later and do it all over again for 6 months. So how many eggs come from a single spotted sea trout? That gives you a fairly good example of mortality occurring here and here, out here in the lagoon. And I have a suspicion that those anchovies aren't just eating copepods, and there's a lot of anchovies out there. But we don't know. In fact, that stresses again, the last lecture, we were seeing all the birds. No one's doing that for fish. There's a tagged snook going out there somewhere that somebody might know where it is. But we have no idea. I can tell you all kinds of things here, and you won't be able to refute me because it's not being done. So the birds are the barometer, actually, of what's going on here. Particularly those birds that eat fish are giving us some idea of what's going on in the water. So that egg I showed you grows up to be this monster here. And of course, this is what the fishermen, it's too bad we have monsters like this because that's all they concentrate on. Where did it come from? Oh, I don't care. I don't care about that little guy there. I want to know how I can get this guy here. Well, it so happens if you lose seagrasses, this guy is gone. And so Martin County no longer has spawning spotted sea trout in Martin County. They disappeared from Hobe Sound down before that, and there are areas of Brevard County where they aren't there anymore. Red drum depend on certain organisms that depend on seagrass, blue crabs, for instance. This is the Oslo Road red drum right here. Unfortunately, they just released thousands of red drum at Oslo Road. They would eat this guy in a second. At the same time this guy was there. It was a big mistake. It was a hatchery red drum release, which unfortunately probably put a dent in the local red drum population. This is what red drum will grow up to be. And when I was at the Kennedy Space Center, we're up in the helicopter all the time. This is 10,000 red drum, this size right here. Yeah. They're getting ready to spawn, and they were spawning at the Kennedy Space Center. Now, they were up in the helicopter not looking for fish. They were looking for manatees, of course. Fish weren't on the agenda. And this guy happened to work for me for 10 years. He took the photograph. He's been working up there for a while, Doug Scheit. I asked him a month ago, do you still see this? He says, no, they're gone. They're all gone. They're gone along with the seagrass and all the creatures that they feed on. And so these happy fishermen, photograph taken about 20 years ago, is gone. So what has happened to this beautiful, productive lagoon? And we started noticing it happening actually 16 years ago when we were hunting for seagrass down in Stewart, and it was gone. In fact, it disappeared at a location where in May 1975, I went out with a friend. This is near Sailfish Point, or the House of Refuge, if you know where that is down there. And we pulled a little 50-foot net, and we got 50-some species of fish in that little net. I went, oh my, I'd never seen anything like that. In fact, your provinces of Canada have a maximum number of 50 species. By the way, Florida has 1,200 species of fish recorded from its waters. The lagoon had 400 species. Charlotte Harbor, 250, to give you an example of the difference between these bodies of water. Tampa Bay, about 300. And so I got 50-some in this one pool. That seagrass bed's gone now. The area was dredged up so yachts could go through. And of course, the seagrass has disappeared after the hurricanes went through in 2004. We were out 2005, 2006. Crystal clear water, no phytoplankton, and for miles around the mouth of the St. Lucie River, there was no seagrass. We had to go up to Jensen Beach to look for seagrasses. So my question was, okay, I'm not seeing the plankton bloom, I'm not seeing this green microcystis. What was in the water that killed the seagrass that we can't see? And that could have washed down from Lake Okeechobee or Port St. Lucie or anywhere. And I thought I'd had experience with herbicides before. Maybe it was a herbicide that killed the plants. And not this guy. He didn't do it. He's suffering the consequences now of something else. Now, this was our study site down there in 2006. It was also the study site for the South Florida Water Management District for seagrasses. It all disappeared. So we had to hunt for another study site. That's 2006. This thing about the brown bloom and all that, they came out 2010, 2009, Northern Lagoon for the most part. The one thing that we do know is happening since I started here, and there are plenty of seagrasses here, is the human population has grown. Now, people like to blame agriculture, but if you lived here 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, there were groves all over the place here. And there was ag down to the banks of the lagoon and out on the barrier island, where Orchid Island is today. That was a grove. That was the Kennedy groves. They advertised there's a Kennedy in the grove every day. There were groves everywhere, and we did aerial surveys of this area, and it was just amazing that this was really an agriculture county. But we had plenty of seagrass, a healthy lagoon, and we had the data to show that. So people like to say, well, it's ag. Well, sure, ag can be responsible for some, depending on what they do. But if we looked at the glyphosate use pattern, which is analyzed on a national level by county and published in 2004, we see that Lake Okeechobee had the highest amount of glyphosate, that's Roundup, and the water in South Florida, and then it was 3 counties, St. Lucie, Indian River, and Martin County. It's not true anymore, but, and Dr. Edie Witter and Orca have been looking at this particular compound and where it's most prevalent in the lagoon for a number of years now. And it's really interesting to see. Now the literature has come out that says glyphosate, when it hits saline water, is residual, a little bit longer, and can kill the phytoplankton, the algae, and the seagrass. All those things we're talking about support life in this lagoon. And but no one uses glyphosate or any herbicides in Florida. No one ever treats their houses or lawns with insecticides or weed and feed or sprays. These are just imaginary people doing their job out there. And and you come to Florida, you're supposed to, well, try to kill everything, you know. What happens here? Now, on the Scottish moors, you don't have to worry, okay, about chinch bugs. But here you do. Now, is there a way you can do this and not use this stuff, you know, which was so readily available for everybody? And of course, when they moved to Florida, they're frightened, okay? Oh, you're going to have snakes, you're going to have mosquitoes, you're going to have you're going to have all these creatures all over you. You got to kill everything. And live in your cocoon, you know? Definitely don't go out at night. No telling whether the python will get you or alligator or whatever. So we like technology to save us. And unfortunately, I don't care where you live, we live near the Indian River Lagoon, because every canal flows to the lagoon. In fact, I'm 6 miles west. This is Round Island Park, right on the lagoon, where they sprayed herbicides here. Let's see, I'm going to show you. This Blue Cypress Lake, Stick Marsh, and we'll be talking about these places in a little bit more detail here. And you can divide the county up into those wetland areas west. What used to be intensive agriculture, you can see the remnants of all the groves there. Then as you cross over I-95, you go into this western boundary, which used to be mostly ag, but now it's being developed. And then the urban, suburban Vero Beach. Now what happens is this water, and water from everywhere here, flows down a whole series of canals. Some of it goes up through the St. Johns River, which is up here. This is the headwaters of the St. Johns River. This is the big plateau here, the prairie. It goes at 50 feet here. Make sure you have your mouths open when you go up and start going past Yeehaw Junction, because yours will pop, you know. And then when you get to Lake Wales, make sure you really have it open, you know. Anyway, so we'll talk about the Stick Marsh, Headwaters Lake, and the St. Sebastian River, high density development here. Well, we won't talk much about my yard. I've already presented it. But I was about 5 or 6 miles from the lagoon. We've measured it. Floodgates open 4 hours from my mailbox to the lagoon. The water's there in 4 hours, okay, with the floodgates open. And somebody's told me, well, you know, I'm way back out here. Well, okay, 12 hours maybe. But you're connected. And every house there has a connection. And there's a major connection with Stick Marsh and Headwaters Lake through this Fellsmere Canal and the C-54 Canal to the Sebastian River. Now, this is data that Dr. Witter gave me, Orca, I think about a month or two ago. And the question was, where's the Fellsmere Headwaters Lake? Because it took the prize for glyphosate increase during this time period. Well, it turns out it's right out here by the Stick Marsh. The Stick Marsh is there, and this is this area here. So it had a tremendous increase. The next place was the Indian River at the dog park here in Vero. And then if you look at these it drops off right here after you get past Bethel Creek and Vero Isles. The one thing that all of them have in common is they're near the mouth of the main relief canal. And so this is very interesting data, and it's a canoe launch in Sebastian. It's up there. So the question is, where did it come from? I mean, what was going on? And of course, the stick marsh is just a great place for wading birds. And the last talk, that talked about a number of the birds disappearing that depend on fish, and this guy was one of them. He's eating the gar there. So mercury, sure, and mercury has increased in atmospheric quantities globally because of coal-fired plants and China coming online, us as well. And then it precipitates out and is fixed in natural ecosystems, unfortunately, like the Everglades, like this marsh. So we have that, but now we have other things too. So why would you need to use herbicides out there, you know? Well, in Lake Okeechobee, we know they use a lot of it. And this is microcystis that's bloomed, and we know it's bloomed elsewhere around the country when herbicides have been used to eradicate the natural planktonic community. It's gone. It's like if you clear a lot of trees, native trees, and let it sit there, you know you're going to have Brazilian peppers growing in South Florida. Well, let's kill all the plants in the freshwater lake, then bingo, what are we going to have? Cyanobacteria bloom, and it's happened in Lake Erie, it's happened in Lake Tahoe, it's happened in lakes all around the country. And of course, this stuff kills fish, and it's dangerous for us to breathe over this water. If you've ever been down to Stewart when this happens, you don't want to get near the water. So that's what we have now. Now, this is the canal that leads up to the Fellsmere Headwaters Lake and the Stick Marsh. This is the Fellsmere Canal. It's been there for a long, long time. This is a spillway looking around the other way where the water is flowing down into the North Fork of the Sebastian River, St. Sebastian River. And we're in a state park here, beautiful area. Unfortunately, and I sampled this area for 50 years now, the fish there. There are no fish to speak of there right now. The last couple of years, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has helped me try to find fish there. And this was also one of the prime areas for fish that are only found here, that we've been trying to get on the endangered species list. They're rarer than wood storks, they're rarer than scrub jays, but they're no longer here. Well, we found that people are routinely spraying this area with herbicides. And why were they spraying with herbicides? To get rid of this green thing floating on the water there called water lettuce. They say water lettuce is an exotic. Well, water lettuce is fossilized in most of your fossil grounds around the entire state of Florida. So it's been here for a little while, including Vero, 10,000 years or so. It's an exotic, yeah. And the manager of this state park told me that when that water lettuce starts coming downstream in large numbers, the manatees concentrate in here to eat it like candy. So when I'm taking this photograph, this last fall, they were feeding romaine lettuce to manatees up at the power plants in Titusville. At the same time, they're using herbicides to kill all the water lettuce that the manatees used to aggregate. I'm sure the manatees came down to the Sebastian River over the eons because it's warm water. No, they have to go to the power plant at Titusville. That's where the manatees are supposed to go, so we're going to feed them romaine lettuce up there. And that'll keep them from starving to death. Go see the movie Avatar. It'll teach you more about the underwater world. It's frustrating. Anyway, so this is a C-54 canal adjacent to it, and that'll load up with manatees during the winter if there are any manatees left. And this is the forest there. It's just beautiful. This is native Florida pine line forest, okay? This is what much of Florida looked like. And it'll burn periodically, and they burn this periodically to keep it that way. Sammy McGee runs this place, and she's great. She really is great. Okay, I've lived here a long time, so I could only afford an old grove site that nobody wanted and built a house there. And you see it's all groves. Nobody wanted anything out there anyway. That's why I was able to buy it. But this is it today. I have a few neighbors, and that's increasing. This was a forest that was cleared in 2 weeks, mulched in 2 weeks, the forest. A number of the houses are done, and people are moving in just as they were fastest building it. 9 houses a week were completed in there. And this is the highest density development adjacent to the lagoon in the county that I'm aware of. And it's right next to the North Relief Canal. Now, I'm near canals too. You can't get away from canals in the, this is South Relief Canal, goes straight to the lagoon. So from my mailbox to the lagoon, 4 hours. It's quicker here. There's a sort of North Relief Canal, there's the lagoon. So this place has plenty of water. What happens when you have to release that water? And then the big question is, what are you doing here around each of these units? Are you treating it with herbicides, pesticides? What are you doing with the water that you have here? Are you treating it with the herbicides? Or is any fertilizer being used there? And then how many people do you have with different perceptions of what needs to be done? I'm in Florida now. I understand they have raccoon warnings in here. If you see a raccoon, stay inside. And an otter was seen, and that was even worse. You don't want to be near an otter. And of course, I've seen this out there. So the connection of you and water is the Florida thing. No matter where you are, you're connected. I don't care whether you're in Orlando or here. Eventually that water ends up on the coast. And what goes in that water comes off your yard is important. And I've talked to people in Port St. Lucie, said, oh, there's a St. Lucie River? I didn't know there was a St. Lucie River. Yeah, it goes into the Indian River Lagoon. Oh, lagoon, where's the Indian River? Oh, it's over there somewhere. And this has been my problem as a marine biologist and aquatic biologist all along, is it's easier to look at the backyard than it is the coastal waters or the rivers and what's underwater. And believe it or not, I used to snorkel this river and count the fish. Yes, and I didn't have to worry about dying. And of course, this place wasn't on the map until 1985. After 1985, it was on the map. And as a biologist who studied Florida for his entire career and loved these marine animals around the state, it's been sort of disheartening. And if this is my last talk, I'm speaking to the choir here, I know. But there's some positive things, okay? And Earth Justice right now is suing EPA for not protecting this lagoon. And I met with their lawyers, and some of you probably did as well. We went to this place, which is magnificent. And this is actually something we were pioneering at Harbor Branch 45 years ago, is taking human waste, sewage, and growing algae. John Ryther headed that program. There was a postdoc by the name of Brian LaPointe, which some of you might know. He's still a biologist at Harbor Branch, and Dennis Hanasak. Their objective was to look at the growth of algae as cleaning the water. That algae, by the way, doubles its biomass in 4 days. 4 days, it doubles its biomass. So it reacts quickly to nutrients. And that is the whole concept behind these scrubbers. This is Osprey. This is 5th Street Southwest here. This is a park, which is a nice walking park, which is, the water is treated with algae here, then it goes through a series of ponds, and then it goes through this water course, and it comes out into the canal here. By the way, it's a raging torrent of water there, and we've collected our endangered species and no exotics there, which I thought has been tremendous. So we want to make that a study site. Now further west, you have the egret marsh, same thing. You grow algae here. You can see this used to be Groveland. And the algal farm was in that squares right here. Water's treated with algae first. Then it goes into these polishing ponds, and it goes into a wood stork habitat area. Now, it'd be nice to know what fish are in there, but fish are inconsequential. Water goes across this bed right here, flows downhill, and grows algae. And the one at Osprey, they told me that USDA had looked at that algae and it could be used for human consumption. Okay? But it could also be used for ag purposes as well. And they cleaned it out every 3 or 4 days. At least that's what they did at Osprey. So it's a very quick turnaround. Right now it's going to the landfill. Why, I don't know. And of course the wood stork area is loaded with birds, feeding on, fish. But I don't know what fish are there. But it'd be nice to have the fish surveys as the bird surveys are done. So that, I think, is very positive. It treats the water that's going down the canals. And we need more of that. We need them everywhere. It was a concept from 50, 60 years ago. It's coming to fruition in Indian River County. So we need the seagrass for it to survive out here. Seagrass is producing an economy. It's producing a food source. I actually had to feed my kids fish as we were growing up because biologists don't make much money. And crabs, shrimp. Hopefully everybody likes crabs and shrimp. We don't have seagrass, we don't have those critters. Okay? And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We could have maybe one question. We're still a little. Any big question on? Yes, back there.
So, Grant, you told me that Sebastian River has the most diversity of all kinds of fish. And what do you estimate now the fish diversity is, or have you measured it?
We just don't know.
You're not willing to go see,
Well, I am. If somebody will fund, I still have all those nets. And we just need, there's several different technologies now that can be used. They're using environmental DNA, and we hope to have that. You can taste the water and tell what's there, okay? But there are also tagging methodologies and other things that can be done to see what's going on out there. And I wish we could observe like the birds. I wish we could make observations like that, but we just can't. Now there is sonar, high resolution sonar. It's kind of like this radar that you're looking for the birds, a Ditson sonar, which has been used for fish, but $50,000 per unit or something like that. Underwater takes a lot of money, unfortunately. Yeah, so it hasn't been done. I can't answer that question. If there's no seagrass, we know we've lost a lot.
One more question? Yes.
What can we do about developments clearing lots? I mean, isn't there any regulation, city council?
There used to be concern for that. I was told by somebody sitting on the planning and zoning board that they're dominated by realtors and developers right now. But we need more citizen input on that, and a lot more. I used to, and other scientists at Harbor Branch used to sit in the planning and zoning councils and boards to advise them. And I know several people in this room who are biologists did as well. But I don't think that's happening now. And the thing is, the other concern I have is we're losing ag land, very valuable agricultural land, and we don't have the perception that that's food. The food comes from Publix. We'll always have Publix, right? But there's a development going off 58th right now. Look at that dirt that's piled up there. It's rich, dirt that'll grow anything. And what's going to happen? It's going to go under houses. We can't eat houses. So I think that crisis is coming.
Right. Audubon helped pass the tree ordinances and the landscape ordinances. They need to be upgraded, and we'd love to have some of you come and volunteer to help do that. We need to do it in our county and our cities that definitely need. Dr. Schlub, you had a question?
Yes, Dr. Gilmore. I loved your talk. I just couldn't help but notice that you had 2 aerial pictures between 2003 and 2006. My question is, how much do you think the natural disasters could be involved in keeping that seagrass low? Like, we had the 2 hurricanes in 2004 pass by here. Do you think that had any reason for that aerial picture to show as it did?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, those 2 hurricanes, Francis and Jean, were quite large. They weren't like Andrew. In fact, they destroyed our marine lab at Harbor Branch, which was several miles further north. Seagrass is just 6-7 miles away. We're still intact, and we know the hurricane impacted that area as well. And of course, the runoff from the St. Lucie River was enhanced by runoff from Lake Okeechobee as well, coming down the C-44 canal, which could have, and that's an artificial connection, by the way, that didn't occur previously. Hurricane events occurred all through history, and we had a hurricane when I was studying the seagrasses. David went right up the lagoon, dropped 17 inches of rain here. I mean, impoundment I was studying went from hypersaline to fresh. We still had seagrasses. We had luxuriant seagrass beds at not too far from where I was studying that impoundment, and at Harbor Branch. A lot of runoff. So something was different in 2004. And so I was like, well, what might be different? It wasn't until I got into the literature, the herbicide literature, about 3 years ago, I went, oh my gosh, I had no idea, you know. That could have been it, because the water was crystal clear. When a hurricane hits, you're going to have runoff, you're going to have turbidity, you're going to have materials flowing downstream. This is crystal clear water year 2 after the hurricane's passed. So to me, it was a sign that there was something else in the water, something we can't see, and of course that chemistry has to be done. I mean, Dr. Witter is starting it, and there needs to be a lot more of that done. That's critical. Any project right now that looks at habitat has to look at water chemistry.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, we've asked the speakers, or I'm asking the speakers to sit at different tables at our lunch, and so you can have another opportunity to carry on a conversation with them. Great job. Thank you.